spending my days in a total rage with the world, and so it was rather good for me to do that.
Time for one or two more if they're out there, yeah.
So you're an Australian by birth, you live in New York City, and you wrote a novel set in London or in England. Can you tell us about how that affects your writing? And
Well, clearly I'm a genius. Well, it's sort of like this, you know, really. That firstly, one's tendency as a writer and as a young writer is to, you know, contain oneself to the environment that one can be sort of confident about, unless you're writing about space aliens, and then you can do whatever you like. And at a certain stage in my life, I'm usually led by ideas, like the way I sort of talked about the internal combustion engine and so on. The thing begins with a sort of an idea. And I had an idea that would lead to a novel, Oscar and Lucinda, which had to be set in the 19th century. And there was no escaping from it. I didn't want to do it. I was terrified of it. I'm not only a university dropout, but I would clearly have to write about Oxford University in a convincing manner. That alone was enough. And I'm Australian. I was going to have to write from inside an English character and so on. At the end of a lot of fretting and anxiety, I found out that I could do that. So I could make that sort of step. It's relative, as an Australian, you know, people, Australian of my age, really, we're sort of growing up in the edges of the empire as a colony that's never really fought a war against the imperial power, and with a grandfather that called England home, although he'd never been there. So there is a sort of a close emotional, there's a real affinity with British culture and Britain itself. So when I finally went there at the age of 24 and saw all those green grasses, having come from the land of the sunburnt country, I thought I'd come home. So it's a sort of a colonial habit of mind, if you like, to be able to make that particular stretch. But it's still a stretch, and one's very wary of getting it wrong. So having done that, there were other things that I needed to deal with, which were in relationship to colonial history. Magwitch in Great Expectations is a perfect Australian in his false consciousness, for instance. And so an idea leads one beyond oneself. So the idea leads me. I'm living in New York and I'm thinking about this country, and I'm thinking about it as being inside, because I've lived here for 20 years, or maybe it was 18 then, and outside as well. And looking at democracy in America, I thought, well, here's something I can do. Here's something actually that the outside eye can maybe do rather well. And so writing about America, what was interesting about it, I've always thought Americans were so different to Australians, you know, where Australians basically believe in failure and loss, and are sort of generally sort of deeply traumatized by their history and can't admit it. And Americans go about things in a slightly different way. I mean, we had the convict ships, and you had the Mayflower. So the sort of force of those sort of those white settler foundations really continue to affect this country, and they continue to affect Australia. So, but coming to think about New York in 1830, I was staggered to find New Yorkers, and this is reading about Tocqueville's visit, acting in exactly just like Australians, you know, in the sense, you know, really being impressed by the French aristocrat, and really all going around, and the French aristocrat really condescending beyond belief to you know, about these awful colonials. With New York was like a suburb, and there wasn't a single museum that wasn't laughable, and so if, as an Australian, we really know about this stuff. This is our bread and butter. We've sort of grown up with this, or someone of my age has anyway. So I figure that I can do that. I can find a way to inhabit that time and add something and have a authentic view of American history. So I've lived there, I should be able to. And then with Parrott and Olivier and the French, well, what a nightmare. I mean, I've got to invent a French aristocrat, and I grew up above a GM dealership in a town of 5,000 people. And I got to write a little boy growing up in you know, the Chateau de Barfleur. And I can't even order in French in a restaurant, you know. And so, but life experience teaches that you can do that. You can go beyond yourself, and if you do the work. And the big issue for Topher, which I knew a lot about, was class. My lovely parents sent me from the little working class town to Geelong Grammar, which is the most expensive, most elite school in all of Australia, and so prime ministers go there. And I guess the fact that Rupert Murdoch went there is of no great significance. But still, so knowing about class, I learned a lot about class. So, and that's, well, it was a gift. So one can stretch beyond oneself. I think the thing that we, for me, the great thing about possibility of being a writer is that the fearful, the business of being other, not just being oneself. To you know, it's what, if you get a great genius like Shakespeare, you know, I mean, it's just Shakespeare. The Borges story, when Shakespeare says to Shakespeare, Borges dreams about Shakespeare, who complains to God that, you know, that really basically he's no one, and God says to Shakespeare, "You are every man and no man, my dear Shakespeare." And in what's sort of what the writer really should aspire to, I think, to try and be other, and to try and be able to imagine lives well beyond his or her own. Oh. This is the last question.
So is that why it's the 19th century?
We're living in the 19th century. I mean, we're living with the consequences of the 19th century. In the 19th century, everybody thought, if you talk about economic growth, that was a great thing. You know, and we still, if you pick up the New York Times, and I'm sure it's true of the Washington Post, you'll see the last quarter's growth figures are really good. They're up. And then if you want to read about what's happening to the planet, you know, we're already grown to such an extent that we're consuming the resources of 1.5 planets. So therefore growth's really bad. So we continue to report growth as if we're living in the 19th century while experiencing the traumas and crisis of the 21st century. And if you want to look at this book, it's about those sort of issues. And any time I've gone to the past, it is I don't want to live in the 19th century. But I'm not sure I want to live in the 21st, actually. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, even for all of your books, like the True History of the Carey and all these others, I mean, it's consistently, or very often, the 19th century, which I think is very appealing. But I was wondering what you chose.
Well, it's just, I mean, I bet you at this very moment in this city, there are a whole lot of people, maybe not always lying on couches, maybe sitting or something, but what are they talking about? Well, they're talking to professionals about their childhood. And all the shit that happened to them, and that costs serious money for 50 minutes or whatever it is. So, this is to sort ourselves out. Now we really have to look at what happened before, and that's why I keep on going there as a visitor. Okay, thank you very much.